Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is a podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I am your host, and I'm also the lead pastor of the Loft Faith community in Westwood, California. Today, I am joined by my friend and colleague, Reverend Blair Trickstad-Stowe. Blair, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. It's gloomy here in California today.
I know.
But that's a nice change. It's been hot.
It's actually, I saw that it was a little bit gray, and Isaiah was like, oh, is it going to rain today? And I was like, I don't think so, but it can stay cloudy for
I got
a good
2
couple
drops
hours.
on the walk to school this morning. I got
Right.
2 drops of precipitation. But
that's probably about all we're going to get out here because we're in a, mostly we're always in like, a drought, perpetual drought. But
we'll take the rain when it comes.
Exactly. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about really what it means to be unapologetically inclusive beyond our stereotypical assumptions of like, race, gender, class, sexuality, and really do a deeper dive into what it means for us to create communities that are inclusive for not only disabled people, but also their families, like the family members. I'm very excited to be joined by one of my students from my teaching at Methodist Theological School in Ohio, Melissa Brasher. And I'll let her say a little bit more about herself. But Melissa is a first-year MDiv student. And we are excited to have her here to tell us a little bit about her story. So, Melissa, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. How are you guys?
Good. I think we're hanging in there. Yeah,
Good.
We're surviving.
Solidly in the school year, solidly in the semester. So we're rolling now.
We're rolling. I'm trying to get my groove. So thank you so much for having me. Yes, my name is Melissa. I am a bachelor's degree of business management mathematics, and I am a proud mommy of a 17-year-old daughter. She is a senior. Her name is Hannah. And also my son. My son, Jordan, was born 10 years ago, and we were told that he would not live to see his first birthday. And so we have fought every day with everything that we have. And he turned, like I said, he turned 10 this year. And he is a blessing. He is a gift. And he is also very enlightening on teaching us a lot about ourselves, a lot about children, and most importantly, a lot about the world.
Melissa, could you share just maybe like exactly what disability he has and just how have you had to change your life in light of having Jordan to be part of your life?
Absolutely. I am a very extroverted person by nature. I love to talk to people, visit people, see people, be with people, connect with people. I have a very outgoing personality. And when my son was born, had a very typical pregnancy, typical delivery, everything was fine. And then within that first 48 hours in the hospital, our entire world turned upside down. They ran multiple tests, and they did what's called a microarray, which is where you check genetics, you check chromosomes to see if there are additional ones, missing ones, or deleted or copied ones. And his came back fine, but we are sure, based on all of the issues that he has had, that there is some type of genetic problem. There's just not anything that has been exclusively diagnosed. Like I said, after he was born, they told us that they felt that he had something that was called leukodystrophy, which means he would not make it to his first birthday. And they did that test, and the neurologist was stunned that he does not have that. He does not carry that. So we basically had to come to peace with the fact that there was not an answer. There was not something that was going to be diagnosed. And we turned all of our work to care. Therapy, what it is we needed. I needed to equip and educate myself. Kids don't come with a book anyway, but especially a child that has any type of disability, any type of struggle. You have to figure out the individualism of the child. You have to figure out what will work with the child. And it is very, very eye-opening. One, you kind of have to deal with your own struggles and what you thought life would be like. I tell people that when my husband and I got this or found out, obviously, that something was very wrong with Jordan, in order for us to heal, and this probably sounds very controversial, we had to bury who we thought our son was. We had to let that go. Because if we
Mhm.
didn't, we would spend the rest of his life comparing him to what he should have been. And that's not fair to him, and it's not fair to us. And so once we were able to grieve the loss of that, then we were able to really focus on him and focus on our family and see what we needed to do to help him thrive and to help us thrive. And he has had 13 surgeries to keep him alive. One being brain surgery, where there was a 50% chance that he would not even make it off of the table.
Mm.
The other being heart surgery with the same circumstance. And then about 3 years ago, right before COVID, we found out this was an additional issue that he has no immune system. So every Thursday, I actually have to perform a surgical procedure on him to infuse human donated immunoglobulin into his system just to help keep him from not dying from like the common cold. So every day is scary. And learning how to balance that, how to live in that, how to find joy in that, has been really probably the most overcoming struggle that we've had to face.
Yeah, I don't even know how many follow-up questions I have, I'm like probably too many, but I don't wanna ask everything. The question I wanna ask is maybe a little bit more specifically about you and just how have the last 10 years shaped your faith? I mean, there's a way in which I feel like a lot, you could have gone multiple paths, and the fact that you are pursuing ordination at least speaks to the way in which the church and your spirituality has been a grounding for you. But I suspect that wasn't easy. And so, just how has this past 10 years really impacted your faith?
I have always been, you'll find out in my paper that I'm going to submit. I've always had a very different connection with God, I think, than a lot of people, not more special, just it was very different. And so, that to me, in my entire life, of everything that has happened to me, has been the one thing that has never shaken. It has never crumbled. And so when we had this happen, the hardest part I had was I felt like who I was also being taken away, because like I said, I was a very extroverted person. I loved going out and I loved doing things. And for the first 3 years of Jordan's life, we literally did not know if he would be alive at the end of the day. And so all of our heart and soul were pouring into this, and I lost the connection with people, the whole world. It's almost like our house became a prison, because while we were focusing on all of this, we couldn't have people over and we couldn't go do things, and life just stopped, and it just became this every single day. And while we had support from well intended, loving family and friends, nobody could really help us because we didn't even know what we needed. Jordan had 13 specialists at one time, and they're all telling you something different. And you spend your days, especially when they're that young, just every day there's a doctor's appointment, another test, and all of these things, and you're just trying to breathe in it. You're just trying to stay afloat. So the first 3 years were actually very dark for me. It was a very isolating time for me, but it seemed like when the moment got too great, too much, something would always happen, some small sentiment from someone. And to me, that was God speaking to me. I am right here. I am right here. We are going to walk through this together. So it is also very interesting to me. My son is nonverbal. He babbles like a 1 year old, but he does not understand anything. So he doesn't understand no, he doesn't understand words like that. But in the surgeries, especially in the surgeries that he has had, he has been more of a witness of God to non believers, and he can't even speak. One of his surgeries, it was not going well, and it was his heart surgery, and they were They were having to put a device in to try to cover up a lot of scar holes and things like that. It's a long story. Well, they couldn't get the device to work. And so the doctor, they called me in the waiting room and said, this is what's going on. If we can't get this to work, we're going to have to just close him up and, try again. And they said, start your prayer chain or whatever it is y'all are doing, because we do that. And when they got off the phone, it was 45 minutes before we heard anything else. And then they sent us to the room. And everybody that knows the room is the room you don't want to go to. And he came in the room and he sat down and he said, I'm not a Christian, but there was something in that room. There was something in that room saving him, and he did fine, through the surgery. So having to learn to surrender has been I don't surrender well. I'm not a control freak. I don't want to make the plan, but I want to know the plan. Like, I'm a
I
very
hear you.
organized, want to
I am
know.
with you in that.
Want you to make it. I just want to know it. And this is a plan that I have no idea what is next. Like, we literally have no idea what is next. And so to surrender to that has been the most empowering for us, because it allows us to stay focused. That I'll even share one of the hardest things that people didn't understand was during one of his surgeries, the brain surgery. They allowed us to walk him in and lay him in the room in the OR, to put him on the bed and then walk out, which is not common, when kids have surgery. And we actually got to the point, talking about grieving him and things like that. We had to get to the point where the prayers that we were praying were not to keep him alive. The prayers that we were praying were for what was best for him. What is best for him, what is best for our family. And to be able to surrender that need, and to be able to just live in that, is what has really gotten us to where we are.
Wow. I do think that there's a way in which I think we all live with this idea of an illusion of control. Is kind of how I like to phrase it, and
Yes.
it's really tied to the amount of privilege that we have in our lives. And I think for me, being a Black man growing up poor, I knew how much control I did not have over my life, and I've always lived with that particular kind of awareness. And I think as I've gotten older and met more people and then acquired more wealth and more access, it's easy to fall into this trap of believing that we can control so much of our lives and so many things that we can try to structure and set aside. And it's these moments where something happens to us that reminds us that all we really can control is how we respond. And that's
Right.
always, that's all we can control. We can't control what happens. We can't control how someone else feels. And that's so hard for Americans, I think, in particular, but particularly for those of us who, being in control feels good. It feels good. And Rekha, you said this idea of letting go and surrendering, even not only surrendering, I suspect not only the kind of, like life you would have, the kind of child Jordan would have, but I'm sure the kind of parent you were going to be able to be to Hannah, or the kind of partner you were going to be to your husband. I mean, all those ideas of what you could be or what that could be become had to shift and had to change. And I can't imagine that has been particularly easy. I'm curious about how, raising Jordan, like how has been received in the community, right? Whether it's your family or your community in Tennessee, right? You live what
Yes.
city in Tennessee? Yeah, I know it's in
Carterville,
South.
Tennessee, about 30 minutes outside of Memphis.
Okay, yep. So I'm sure people could tell from your accent from the South. So beautiful accent, beautiful
Thank
accent.
you.
But I'm really curious about how churches and other communities have responded to you, both positively and negatively, just how that experience has been for you trying to raise Jordan and I imagine keep him into community and things of that nature.
Right. Well, being a white woman, I have not had to endure a lot of the judgment, the criticism that other people of color, Black people, have had to deal with. So that part was never really in my mind. I just was always a very friendly person, a very outgoing person. And as far as by community, I'm meaning just the world in general. I did not realize the dramatic difference that would happen by having a disabled child. My son looks, we don't use the word normal anymore. We stopped using that 10 years ago. We use typical. So if you look at my son, you do not see any type of disfigurement or anything that would cause you to believe that something is wrong, other than the fact that he is in a wheelchair and he does not talk. So there's no issue as far as that. But just to be in public, we are stared at, we are avoided, we are whispered about. I was talking to you about this last week. I welcome when little children who are curious about him ask, because to me, that's the way we can educate. So, I don't want parents to feel like they have to tell their children, Shh, don't look at him. Don't, come and talk to him, come and ask him, because he's alive and he exists and he deserves to be seen. He deserves to be acknowledged. And when your child has a question about him, mommy, why isn't he talking? Why isn't he walking? We get to use that as an opportunity to teach and educate about who he is. Just because he has differences, he still has a little heart and a soul and a personality, and he's amazing. And so having to look at the world as a rejection or as something different was very, very sobering to me. It was very, very humbling to me. Now, a lot of people, obviously, in the South, we usually chat and things like that. A lot of people are very nice, and they'll agree. But overall, it has been a very different world. Now, because we had been in our church for several years, we had strong connections, we had strong relationships, and I will honestly say that the best thing that my church has done for our family is to listen. Because we don't know what we need. People that are in our situation, or people who are struggling with or dealing with autism, ADD, hyperactivity, things like that. Sometimes you don't know what you need. And even more fun than that, it changes on a daily basis. So what works today may not work tomorrow. But the fact that my church staff, they were listening to me. They were asking what they could do to help, what we needed. And one of the biggest things is, because my son is 10, he is in a very interesting situation in that, for childcare. So, kids go to Sunday school, kids go to nursery. Well, because he's 10, he can't be in the nursery with the babies and the 1-year-olds and the 2-year-olds, because he's too big. He could fall and hurt someone. So that's not going to work. Well, also because he's 10, but yet he doesn't speak and he doesn't understand, he can't be with the 10-year-olds, because he could hurt himself in that he's not aware, or they could hurt him. Given his immune disorder, he can't be around people. So my church has actually hired staff to keep him in a room alone and watch him. And what that has given my family is a moment to breathe.
Yeah.
We know that he's taken care of. We know that he's happy. We know that he is loved. These people are very careful with him. And it gives us a sense of community, because we're able to go back into worship. We're able to go back into the life of this church and these people and be who we are, in addition to being his family, in addition to being his parent. And so the fact that they listen, that's been the greatest gift for us.
One of the best metaphors I've heard about becoming the parent of a child with a disability, because I shared that my 5-year-old has autism, and he has very low support needs. So in many ways, we're very lucky that, but that's right now. We don't know, right? We don't know what could happen. And the disability community is a minoritization that anyone could join at any point.
Exactly.
Right. And yet it's so unknown. And so anyway, the metaphor is, and I think this might resonate with you, Melissa, is that you are having a baby, you're expecting a child, and it's like you've been planning for a trip to Fiji, and you've got your suitcases packed, and you know what you're going to do, you know everything that's there, you've got the guidebook, you've got your swimsuits, and then you get off the airplane and you're in Norway.
Yes.
In the middle of winter.
Yes.
And you do not have what you need. You thought you were going to a place with one language. Now you're having to learn a whole new language. You don't have a guide. You don't have a guidebook. You don't have the right clothes. And you have to just figure it out. And
Yes.
then the hard thing becomes you're living in Norway and everyone else around you is in Tahiti.
Yes.
So it's like
Yes.
living in a different culture, even in the midst of shared community, shared space. And so what you're sharing about like mourning, that like you were really excited about your vacation to Fiji, and like Norway's great and beautiful and there's beautiful things about being in Norway, but it is not Fiji. Like that's
Exactly.
not the plan. And
Exactly.
so just like all the things that then unravel from that.
Yes.
And
100%.
it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it has its own moments, but it's also terrifying and scary because you don't know how to climb traverse a fjord. You were planning to go on a zip line, and these are two totally different activities.
100%. 100%. And that's been such a beautiful thing too, is our church has also been very receptive in listening to, like I said, not only are they listening to what we need, but they're listening to any guidance that we may have. The church had decided to do a special needs Easter egg hunt because most children that have
Mm.
disabilities, they can't do even the typical events. They can't go see Santa or do the Easter egg hunts or do.
And they certainly can't keep up with the other kids chasing those eggs a lot of
Absolutely.
time. Any
Absolutely.
kind of
And so,
mobility or developmental, all sorts of
yes,
reasons why
all sorts. And
it's
so
got to
they
be
did.
different.
Right. They did this Easter egg hunt and they called me in to talk to the volunteers. And, and I told them, I said, it's just the simple things. Like I said earlier, I said, when you see one of these kids, kneel down, speak to them. Some of them don't like eye contact. Some of them don't want to be touched. Some of them don't want to be, talked to, or they won't converse with you, but still acknowledge their existence. Look at the parent. Look at the parent in the eye. Give
Hmm.
that parent eye contact that we see you, that we validate you, that we're here with you. You don't have anything to be ashamed of. You don't have anything to be stressed about. You don't have anything to be, you are welcome here. And if you can just do that, if you can just show that to that family will be able to do what they need to do to make this event successful and fun and happy. Just listen and acknowledge.
I
Which
think
is like, what if we treated everyone like that too? Right? Like, what if
It's
we
so
just
simple.
understood that human beings are different from each other and moving through the world with vastly different experiences that we cannot know or understand?
It's
And
so
like
simple.
the
Yes.
beauty in just treating people as whole human beings with
Yes.
challenges and stories that we don't know and needs that we can't understand unless we just ask.
Yes.
No, I think it's obvious that we should treat people as human beings and just ask. But at the same time, I think people default to this idea that you have to conform and that things have to be done this way. And if having you in my space, having you in my ministry requires me to shift what I'm used to doing, I'm not comfortable with that. And then I don't know how to respond in the moment. And I think actually it gets just the point both of you mentioned earlier, control, right? When you have someone that comes to your community that is not typical, right? As you were saying, right, Melissa, is not typical, you lose the idea of control. And how
Mhm.
do you respond to situations when you are obviously not in control that pushes your boundaries, right? And I think this is something I try to teach people who are in leadership positions, things I've learned myself. You need to measure how good of a leader you are, not in times when situations are great. How do you respond when things aren't good? And how do you prevent those not good things from happening, right? Like, and
Exactly.
I think, that's where you can learn to grow as a pastor, as a leader, as a parent, is learning from your mistakes and how you might do things differently and how you might respond things differently. And how do you work with those space in those times where the typical response doesn't work. And I think
Right.
this is it's really difficult for lots of people, but I think it's particularly difficult for church, in part because we're relying on a lot of volunteers, right? We have people who aren't
Yes.
getting paid there who are working. We have some people who are. I think we have all these cultural assumptions and norms around disability where we look at people who are disabled often and we infantilize them, right? Or
Mhm.
we talk about the way in which how they've overcome the disability. We make them into a superhero, right? We just don't
Right.
see them as a person.
Exactly.
And I think that's a huge part of a huge part of the challenge as well. So there's all these different layers that are in place, and theologically, I think both of you have hit this in multiple ways. It comes down to the fact that we are not truly seeing them as a beloved being created in the image of God,
Mhm.
right? That's really, to me, what it comes down to. Is like, what
It
does it
is.
mean to see someone as a child of God, as beloved and bearing the image of God, and how ought they be in relationship with them in light of that? And that, for me, is something that we need to continue to not only think theologically about, but challenge ourselves as religious leaders, as progressive Christians. What does it mean, right, to see every human being as a beloved child of God, as created in the image of God, and how should that shape how we interact with them? So, Melissa, one thing I want to ask, I mean, there's a couple more questions I want to get to before. I don't want to, we don't want to take up all of your time because we know, Lord knows you got plenty of stuff to do. How has this experience been? And by that I mean like raising Jordan. I suspect for your daughter, right? This has
Mhm.
been it shifted her life, right? Like
Oh,
she
definitely.
was 9 years old and she's like everything is going great, and then all of a sudden, boom, this big thing happens that takes up
Mhm.
everybody's time, and I'm sure it's been.
Yes.
So I'm curious, just how have things been for her?
It has been one of the things that I work very hard, and I've always tried to instill, because like I said, of things that have happened in my life, are empathy and compassion. Those are the two huge big players for me in my life. And so when Jordan was born and we started seeing all of these issues, my heart honestly first went to her, because the parenting that she was going to have was now gone. The level, the care, it all shifted. Everyone's lives shifted in that moment. And so we have tried very hard. My husband is very supportive. It is incredible. We have tried very hard to balance the care for Jordan, where one of us is also being able to turn that off and focus on her, to give her,
Mm,
like I said, as typical of a life as possible. She has been through scares with him that were very traumatic for her. She has been through joys, and I really believe that it has instilled in her empathy and compassion, acceptance and love in a way that could not have been taught. And what's so incredible is, before my son was even born, even in preschool, elementary school, we would notice, and the teachers would even tell me, that if there was a child that was sitting by himself or sitting by herself, or a child that was being bullied, or a child that did have disabilities or things like that, even before Jordan was born, she would go and just sit by the child, and she would just be. She wouldn't talk to them, or try to get them to play. She would just sit with them. And so I've always called her a wise soul. And so once Jordan was born, there was no rebellion from her. There was no anger with her. She embraced him. She accepted him. She was scared for him. But even in middle school, when she was in middle school, he was still young. This was when all of the horrible things were going on. She came home, and I mean, just with a certainty that, 9, 10, 11, 12 year olds shouldn't have, she's like, I'm going to be a special education teacher. I'm going to
mm,
do this. And they started pulling her out of classes, even in middle school, to peer, because peer relationships, buddy relationships, to have a typical
Mhm.
child with a special needs child is huge. Because
Really
as we
important.
learned, doctors can do everything, PTs, OT specialists can do everything, parents can do everything, but there is a piece of peer education that you cannot match. You cannot mirror it for a special needs child. So they were pulling her out then, and like I said, she's in high school now, and it has always been her solid path. Like, she has never wavered from it. So I want to say that having him in her life has only solidified and educated her and encouraged her to follow what her call is, because I feel like we all have a call. It depends on what it is, and who you are, but we all have a call. And so I have worried more as a mom that she missed out, or she was neglected, or she didn't get the attention she deserved. But she has never portrayed that to us. And I am incredibly grateful for that.
no, I think that's amazing because I can't. I mean, I can't imagine how. I mean, I'm the oldest of four, and I had a particular situation growing up where I had a lot of parenting responsibilities, and I don't look back on it and think I missed out or anything like that. But I do look back on it and realize that it shaped the person I became. You know,
Right.
it shaped the person I
Mhm.
became. It's probably there's a reason why I think I like to consider myself or feel like my calling is to be a healer, in lots of ways. That's what
Mhm.
I've been doing most of my life. And so that story really resonates with me. So I guess last question I wanted to that I wanted to ask, and Blair, feel free if there's any other things you want to ask Melissa before we let her go. That's totally fine. I think I know, Melissa, one thing you had shared when we were talking before is the ways your church community continues to help you now. And I know you had mentioned that they provide the way you mentioned they provide care for your son is amazing. And I think this is what most churches should do. But I know you had also mentioned some specific things your senior pastor was doing, I think to help you, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mhm. Yes, I mean, like I said, the main thing is just she is very intentional with seeing what we need. As we know, that can change daily, it can change weekly. One of the things, it is not something that we necessarily need, but children and people with disabilities, it's not going away. Like, this is not going to just disappear. Everybody's not going to be fixed. This is not going away. This is our reality. This is our life and our world. And so being able to be very mindful of that from when someone walks in the door, because as a person that has a child with disabilities, I am very nervous now for the first time in my life to walk in a space. Like, I'm very nervous. I'm very nervous. Is he going to be insulting to someone? Is he going to overstep with someone? Is he going to cause hatred? Is he, like, you think all of these things that I've never had to think of. And so basically, I think education and training of how to welcome, how to listen to people. There are a lot of churches in my area. Like I said, it doesn't apply to us, but they have what's called quiet rooms. So, children that have sensory issues, some of them may not be able to be in a typical church service because the music, Jordan is the same way. The music is too loud, the lights are too much, the microphone, it's too much sensory for them. And so, there's a quiet room where the lights are low and soft music or therapeutic music is playing, and there are sensory special toys in that room to where the parent can still be part, because that's the biggest part with us, is that one of us would always have to stay home until my church was able to help, while the other rest of the family went. And it's very isolating for the person that's staying home. It's very disconnected, and the whole essence of being in church is to connect. And so coming up with these ways of having these outlets to where families can go with their situation and be able to accommodate that would be incredibly helpful to really anyone.
No, I think that's such. Oh, go ahead, Blair.
I was gonna say it's some of the things you're sharing, Melissa, are making me think about how community is so hard because very frequently we have conflicting needs, right? So you think about like what a beautiful statement of witness it is that your church has said Jordan has these particular needs, and so we're going to meet Jordan's needs because that's what allows his family to participate in the way that they need to. And I mean, people do this with regular kids of like, well, why should we pay for a nursery attendant? We don't have any kids here. Well, you don't have any kids here because you don't pay for a nursery attendant. And like, well, when the parents come, then they can pay for the nursery attendant. Once they start tithing, then we'll open a nursery. Like, no, that's not like the point of community is not to show up so that only your needs are met. The point of community is to show up together so we can meet one another's needs as a community in ways that we couldn't meet our own needs on our own, right?
Exactly.
And so I think that one of the ways that churches can be more inclusive is to stop thinking about church as a thing that I consume, right? I come to have the music I want and sit in the place that I want and have the experience that I want. And instead, that worship and a church community is a place where we come to to share at a common table, to
Right.
feed and be fed. And I'm sure, you've named the ways in which Jordan's life has been a witness. And I am sure there are ways, and I wonder if you have, maybe one more story for us of like, by your community, especially your church community, saying, we're not going to have Jordan and Melissa and his family be excluded. We're going to welcome them.
Mhm.
Like, how has that changed your faith community? Like, how have you seen that push and challenge and stretch what it means to be for community for your church.
I have found out, I found out the correct definition of this: ignorance just means without knowledge. That's all it
Right.
means, without knowledge. And most people who do not have disability in their immediate life is ignorant of this. One of the things you mentioned about, not having the nursery worker, as a family with what we struggle with, we can't show up to a place, especially a place of worship, and hope that it'll work out. Like, we
Right.
can't do
You
that.
have to know.
You have to know. And if you advertise the word special needs worship service or special needs accommodations, the people that are having to hide, that are stuck, that are in prison, like what we were, will come in droves. Like, they will show up because you're giving them something that they have lost. And so
Right.
for me, what I found out, even in Jordan's school, is that his life is able to educate and enlighten people in a way. And as we were talking about earlier, just the simplicity of acknowledgement and kindness, really every one of us is like that disability. Every one of us, it's empowering us to see and acknowledge and appreciate every person, regardless of whatever the difference is. So many of us, we're only comfortable with what we know, and that's not the point. The purpose is inclusivity, the purpose is connectedness, community. And so I really feel like having the church witness someone that they loved, a family that they knew, that they cared for. We weren't just that family, or, we weren't strangers. They had value. They knew us. And it's really been incredible for people to walk up to us, and the fact that he is here, the fact that we surprised everyone. This is one of my good stories. Okay. So our church gives kindergartners and third graders Bibles, and we've got a rather large sanctuary. And we've got an even longer aisle to walk down. Red carpet, dark pews, big organ, stained glass windows,
Classic.
large,
Classic.
yeah, large. So what we decided to do was surprise everyone. And when the third graders walked down to get their Bibles, we ended up walking him, and people did not know that he had developed into that state. There were people bawling in the aisles, and I get choked up thinking about it, because we were able. He has been such an incredible symbol of hope for people, that just by being here, courage and strength and bravery and hope. And so to be able to see this community appreciate his worth and what he can do and his being is, I think it's life changing for everyone that gets to see it. I mean, I really, you see life in people's eyes when they see him. And that's something that I could never do on my own. I mean, I couldn't witness enough to give that kind of story.
I think even the key word you use right there is see, seeing it for what it is rather than through the lens of, ableism, where your perspective is, perhaps stifled. Melissa, I just want to say I'm really grateful for you to be able to join us. And I think your story is profoundly compelling. The story of your family. So I don't want to just lift you up. I mean, it's four of y'all and a large, a community of people that are helping you. And it's just been, learning from you, and it really has helped me be able to articulate a clearer vision of what it really means to be unapologetically inclusive, to create that kind of community, and what that looks like for people who have neurodivergent families, family. And that, again, like I said, that's more people than we like to think. Like you said, if we just advertise it, people would come. And as many churches that are like, oh, we're struggling, there's not enough people there. I'm like, well, as Blair, as you said, like, what are you doing to
Why
create the
don't you
space?
love somebody different? They're gonna
Yeah.
show up.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Right.
Melissa, I guess I have one just super brief, but your church isn't. You don't go to like a really like super big church, right? Like they're not like a wealthy church or anything like that, right?
No, 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 no. We're not a mega church. No, it's Carterville United Methodist. It has been in our small town for many, many, many years, but we have been through a lot. We just went through a very painful disaffiliation vote where we voted not
Mm.
to disaffiliate, and we lost, sadly, a large part of our congregation. But we are standing firm, and we are on the right path, and we are building every day. And like I said, the love and the compassion, the acceptance, the welcoming, that is what is helping us so much.
I'm so excited for your ministry, Melissa,
Thank
and the
you.
ministry that your family is doing together. Like, just, yeah, thank you. Like, thank you as a pastor and as a mom that you are so open and doing the things that you're doing, and that you continue to show up, because it's so easy to just retreat, and it takes a lot of courage to say we're gonna go, and we're gonna be present. And if that makes other people uncomfortable, then we will figure that out. But we're gonna go. So thank you for doing that, because as you said, like it transforms people by getting to have Jordan in their presence. And that's a gift that you put a lot of energy in to be able to share with the world, to share Jordan with people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Thanks, Melissa. I see you in class next week.
So I want to share, in light of conversations with Melissa, that there's one book that I think I wish everybody in the church would read too, from
Mm.
the perspective of recognizing that this was a conversation of folks who care for folks with disability. Now, like, disability is fluid, and there have been moments where I've been disabled, and right, but there's this really great book called "My Body Is Not a Prayer Request: Disability Justice in the Church" by Dr. Amy Kenny. And that's a really beautiful one, because it is written by a person with disability about their experience in the church. And that can be different than the caregivers. So I just wanted to name that as a resource. And then there's also a really wonderful reading list from Garrett Evangelical that I will add to the show notes, of books on theology and disability, that if folks are feeling excited about this conversation, would be a really good resource for them to continue to jump into.
No, I think that's great. I mean, I have a bunch of, for those of you who will watch some of the clips, you'll see I have a bunch of books behind me, so many of which are on disability theology. I've read My Body Is Not a Prayer Request. And what I particularly appreciate about it is that it's written by a lay person, right? Like, she's a PhD in English. So it's great writing, first of all. I mean, she's brilliant, great writer. But I think it's practical in all what that practical is supposed to mean, right? As a practical theologian as you are, right? Like,
Right,
it is deeply accessible, it is straightforward, and I think it just speaks to the ways in which our institutions, both the church and beyond, even though they're legally required to accommodate, resist the idea, because they think people are her experience. And I think, I'm sure this happens with Jordan, as Melissa just described. You look at someone and they look typical, and you think, okay, you're pretending to be disabled. Like,
right.
who does that? Like, no one, like, there's a minority of a minority that would take that would actually do that, to pretend to be disabled, to gain any kind of favor, or to gain any kind of advantage. Like, having a disability is extremely difficult. Like, it's extremely difficult. And I say this as someone who is neurodivergent, and has had to accept what this means, and as I've gotten older, it's been harder for me to accept that, because it's not only am I impacted by the way my brain works, my body just doesn't do what I want it to now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it hurts, and so that makes things harder. And so I don't want this. I'm not like, ooh, this is great. Let me talk about how this impacts the way I think. It is what it is. And I think our society struggles to accept people, or struggles because it thinks people are pretending to get some kind of advantage. And that's just not the world we live in.
You know what? This is like a huge conversation right now, because the Disney properties, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the Disney properties have changed their disability access services. So Disneyland, Disney World used to be one of the few places that families managing a lot of support needs for disability could get support and have access based on their own needs. And so it wasn't like, people think it was like, oh, you're in a wheelchair, so you skip the line. It wasn't like that. We've used the disability access service for our son, and he just he can't sit still. Like, he can't stand in line, because he will have a meltdown if you tell him he can't run. And you can't keep him busy, right? To stand in a queue. And then once he has the meltdown, then who knows when it's going to be okay and you're going to engage and get him on the ride. And so all sorts of other disabilities exist, like heat intolerance or people who get vertigo from standing too long. Like there's all these different ways that our bodies and our brains don't work in ways that let you stand in a long line to access something fun. And Disney used to be one of the places where folks didn't have to worry so much about that because they had all these different accommodations, and they just changed the system. And folks who have received disability access services for years are now being denied. And folks who like have very visible disabilities are being denied. And one of the reasons they're saying that they had to change the system is that too many people were taking advantage of it. So that folks were like hiring a disabled, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes if you can't see the video, like hiring disabled people to be their tour guides so that they could get on the rides faster. Or and again, that's not how it worked. Like you checked in and then you had to wait the amount of time that the line was when you checked in. So you weren't actually skipping the line. You just didn't have to wait in line so that you could manage whatever support needs you had or your family had outside of the queue. And then when it was your turn, you would get on the ride. And um, I mean, it truly made the difference for us between this being an activity we could do with our autistic 5-year-old or not at all. Like it would have been an absolutely miserable thing to even attempt. And so we have a trip planned, like his grandparents want to take him. And I'm really anxious about it because based on the new qualifications, supposedly this, DAS is supposed to work for folks with developmental disabilities and autism still. But based on the kinds of support needs he needs, I don't think we're going to get it. And I'm dreading it. And so it took something that was a unique space of accessibility and has now turned it into like not only the rest of the world, but like a nightmare scenario
I
for a lot of people.
What's frustrating, first of all, I'm sorry that you've had to experience that and these people are having to experience that. But what frustrates me is the likelihood is that it's more to do with money, and that I suspect
Right.
Disney doesn't want to spend the money to have the staff to do it, because Disney is hemorrhaging money right now and they're trying to figure out ways
Yeah.
to stop the bleeding because of all this stuff happening. And this gets into the work of that I know we're going to talk about a little bit. We're in LA, so like we're in Hollywood, so we understand how a lot of this stuff works, and like they're not making as much money right now for lots of different reasons. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's disappointing to me that that they would make this change under the guise of people taking advantage of the system, when you could just be honest and say, we can't really afford it, and we maybe, if you are disabled, you have to pay more money. And likelihood is some people could and some people can't, right? And like,
Right.
but at least you being honest. I'm like, what I'm saying? Like, I
Right.
think for me, I cannot. I stopped going to parks because of lines, because it's just always been hard for me. And so I'm fortunate now that we have in a financial, by we, again, I always point to the fact my wife is in the financial capacity, so
Right. Right.
we pay all the money just to skip the lines, because I can't. It's not easy for myself or Isaiah, and which means it's not easy for my wife. You know,
Right. And so
uh,
none of you are having a good time.
exactly. So it's just like it's difficult, and so yeah. When we go to stuff like that, we do everything we can to. We know what we need to do to accommodate ourselves. Basically, is what I'm trying to get at, and that makes it tricky. And we couldn't have done it in the past because we didn't want to spend the money.
Well, and like Melissa said, like you can't take the chance that it doesn't work. If you're going to
Exactly.
go out into the world and you have particular support needs, you don't have a typical lifestyle, you need to know that it's going to work, because you can't put yourself or your family or the person you care for into a dangerous situation. And so that just means so many people have to opt out. Like they just can't participate.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I want to say before we move on to about the conversation we had with Melissa, which I was so grateful to have her on here, and I've learned so much from her as a student, was like, I think there's this idea that churches, to do the work that Melissa's talking about, is that you have to have all this
Tons of
money.
money.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'm like, what she, and I know I'm like, her church, and she didn't get into it a little bit. Her church, she is not in a big United Methodist church in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. She's in a average size church that's actually just shrunk because of, I should also mention, for those of you who are not Methodist, the disaffiliation thing that she mentioned earlier is there are many churches in our denomination, because both Blair and I are United Methodist clergy, who decided to opt out to leave our denomination because we are now an inclusive denomination with respect to gender and sexuality and ordination. And some churches were like, "Oh, we don't want to do that, so we're gonna leave."
Right.
And in truth, a lot of if you read all the articles in New York Times and Washington Post, what we're finding is that most of those churches actually wanted to leave because they wanted to control their money. It's much more
Right.
to do with money than anything than
Money and
theology.
property.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I'm like, hey, man, I'm more power to you. Good luck, goodbye, and good luck. That's how I would say. So, that's how I feel. And so, I guess I just wanted to say, like, to me, it's about commitment. It's about commitment and about seeing people as full human beings and saying, what does it mean for us to create a community that's radically inclusive? And this is a ministry that I think to an extent all churches need to be involved in. Now, the degree to which you're involved may vary depending on your own community,
Mhm.
but I think having had in my life students who are disabled has really pushed me, like, or people like Melissa who have disabled children,
Yeah.
to just have a different experience. I got a deaf student in my class this summer, and it radically changed my understanding of the deaf Black community that I just didn't know anything about. Just had
Mhm.
no idea. And you already have a marginalized, underserved community, because they're Black, and then you add the fact that they're disabled, and it's this additional layer of stress that they have to deal with. It has continued to galvanize me to take this theologically seriously, because as a theologian, for me, that's the first place I start is what does this mean theologically.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to name that, and Blair, also wanted to thank you for your vulnerability and sharing, because I know this isn't we're both new parents. Our children are the same age practically.
Mhm.
I was about to say we were pregnant, but I wasn't pregnant. You and my wife were pregnant around the same time.
You were a supportive parent. You were a supportive
Yeah.
partner,
Yeah,
you know.
and, like Melissa was saying, there's no guidebook. I love the
Right.
metaphor of Fiji and
Yeah.
what'd you say, Norway? That
Norway.
feels right.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden you're standing in the fjords in a bikini, and it's just like, you gotta figure out what's going on.
Oh, man.
And the
I know
problem
it's
is, right, like, so then the church, like you were saying, money, right? Like, the church thinks like, "Well, okay, well, we all only need bikinis. We don't have the money to go buy everybody parkas." And it's like, you don't need to buy everybody parkas. You just need to buy parkas for the one kid, right? Like, just ask, right?
exactly.
Because
Ask them what they
like
need.
you don't need to decide that you have to redesign your whole sanctuary to be accessible for wheelchairs, which I hope you will. But like, maybe your small church in middle of somewhere America doesn't have the money for that. But what is it? It can you take out one pew? Can you take out one pew and add a row of chairs? Like, just ask. Like, and most people who live with disability and support needs can tell you they don't have a lot of money either. Being disabled is not lucrative in our society, right? So they are figuring out how to make it work all the time. And so just asking, right? Taking the time to ask, and Melissa kept saying that over and over again, just taking the time to ask, how can this space, can this place, can this community include you better? How can we make sure you feel a part of what's happening here? Because the answers will shock you how simple they are, right? Like Melissa was saying, like, get on my level, look me in the eye. Those things don't cost any money,
Yeah.
and yet we have to be reminded to do them.
Humanize. Humanize, how do we humanize people? Um, There is no we I wanted to pivot, and perhaps that Disney was the ideal place to pivot, but I wanted to say something else, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Talking about the other stuff that's happening in our community out here in Hollywood is we had the Emmys last week, and actually, one of our members, and I can say their names, I didn't ask them, was nominated actually for an Emmy, and so I'm pretty
Ray.
sure, yeah, I think they won, but I don't they weren't at church last week, so I suspected because they were getting all that stuff
They were
together.
there.
So anyway, yeah, yeah. So if they're listening, congratulations. Actually, I do know they listen to the podcast. So I said that to say, like, being out here, being in LA is such a part of the culture. It's such a part of what we do is watching
Right.
television, creating content and things for people to consume that challenges people and changes people. And I know for me, one of the things that I loved about this year, but also the awards this year, was the number of nominations for one of my favorite shows, Shogun, got, and the fact they won so many awards, because honestly, I loved it, but it's a subtitled show in feudal Japan,
Right.
and so
Yeah. It's
I
not
was
in
like,
English.
I was like, no one's gonna. This isn't gonna win anything, man. This is not something that I think. I loved it. Like I'm watching this. Like this is
Yeah,
amazing. It gets into xenophobia, the assumptions that people have about what other cultures are like, the role of the church. I mean, it's all the stuff that I would like, and I was amazed and honestly just like I want to say proud isn't the right word, but I realized the awards have come a long way where a show like
yeah,
that can win, where just great like not just content but a show that really challenged
storytelling.
you. Yeah, yeah. So and I know, so that's what I wanted to share
The
about what I
thing is,
loved about
in
it.
recent years, the Oscars So White controversy,
Yeah,
right? So the fact that a non-English show featuring all Asian, actors, pretty much, and writers, and right? Like, that does show that society is shifting the stories we value, and that's important. I think actually Shogun did, like, break the record for, awards in the Emmys for a non-English show.
yeah.
So that's great. That's fantastic.
And I like watching TV with the captions on anyway because I can't hear. So I'm like,
I
it's
know.
fine with me. So
Me too. Me
I
too.
was like, this is fine, man. And I can have the TV on with the captions while Isaiah's doing something else. And so, like, I can kind of multitask at the same
Yeah.
time if I want to watch something. So,
Again,
I,
a bit, right? What kind of supports do we need? Closed captioning. We need closed captioning.
oh, God.
Not ju I need it for English too,
Yeah,
please.
exactly. Exactly. I know you had mentioned you wanted to say a little bit about the bear because I know there was some controversy. And I did read about this. This was definitely a big deal.
So, actually, I think this is like, it does kind of fit the themes of our conversation, which is, like, figuring out what people need and, like, who gets to define things. And so the controversy is that The Bear has become one of the most awarded comedy series in Emmys history now. And if you've watched The Bear, you maybe chuckle here and there. Like, it's not funny. It's a show about,
It's a
like,
drama.
suicide and drug addiction, and um the abuses of the service industry, and, like, it's heavy. And one of the episodes that won, 4 awards on its own, Fishes from season 2, which is just an absolutely beautifully crafted, heart-wrenching manifestation of a toxic family structure that is responding to and figuring out how to deal with, substance abuse. It's an overwhelming episode of television, like, truly one of the most beautiful pieces of television I've ever watched, and there is, in my mind, absolutely nothing funny about it. And so that's the wild thing, is, like, how did this show that is about these really heavy things, that maybe I'm not saying comedy does help us understand and talk about hard things, and so this has been the controversy, is, like, what do we do with dramedies? What do we do with things that are taking using comedy to shed light on serious topics? And I think that, like, do they belong in comedy or do they belong in drama? And what the Emmys finally decided is, the show gets to decide for itself what it is. And from the outside, I'm like, but that's terrible, because there's, like, really good comedies like Abbott Elementary, who are also talking about very serious things like race and education and poverty, and they're doing that in a way that actually makes you laugh and guffaw, and, like, and they get overshadowed by something that is really, arguably, The Bear is doing something different. It's not,
Mm.
I don't think it's doing comedy. And but, like, I don't get to decide, right? And so I feel really torn of, like, okay, if the rule is the people who made it get to decide what it is and what category it gets put into, like, I want to respect the autonomy of those creators to say what it is that's framing the way they build their work. But what if The Bear had gone up against Shogun? Like, I think they should have gone up against each other, because I think that they're both doing really beautiful things in similar formats, but by putting The Bear in comedy, it just swept every category. And so I feel torn. I don't know what the answer
Yeah,
is.
it's weird because, like, on one hand, you're like, it makes sense that you would allow the people who created the content to say what it is, but that also is like, well, how like, how is this funny? Like, you know what I'm saying? That's what you want to
Yeah.
ask them. Be like,
And
how
who
are
wins
you seeing?
awards is big business, right? Because the people who win awards get more funding, get more producers,
Oh, see,
get more
not seeing.
money.
Yeah, see.
Yeah, so, like, that's a huge part of my husband's a filmmaker, his company won an Oscar last year, like, and it is a lot of work, you put in a lot of money, a lot of time to try to win those awards because of what comes with it. You're gonna get future projects, everybody who works on the project is gonna get more work, like, it's important because of the financial fallout of winning or even just being nominated, and so there, like you were saying, financial piece, like there's a financial benefit to the bear submitting itself as a comedy, even if everybody knows it's not a comedy, it's not funny.
Man, I didn't know that. So it makes I see now the danger of having someone categorize yourself. So this is
Right.
a situation where there's no real easy answers. Like you got to take multiple factors into consideration, how they categorize themselves versus how critics watch it and what they get out of it. And I don't know. Yeah, it's a lot. But
Well, and
you know,
I think it comes back to this, like this theological consideration of the church, where the way in which the church was established in the early church was not supposed to be a community of just of comfort, right?
yeah.
It was a community of struggle, of co-struggle. Compassion, right, means to struggle with. And communities like awards, the academy is actually a community of filmmakers. I don't know exactly who like votes on the Emmys, but like the way the community is supposed to decide what is valuable, when that is lost, and instead of it being, we as the community of filmmakers are going to struggle together about what it looks like to make good film, tell good stories, and we're going to award that, and when it becomes about money, then it corrupts the community, it corrupts that compassion, that co-struggle. And I think that that's something that the church can give the world that we're losing in other places, that
Mm,
we can model what it looks like to continue to be a community of mutual struggle and mutual celebration. So yeah,
no,
that's my theological take on on our pop culture moment.
no, I think it's beautiful because I think we at its best, churches should model what it is to co-struggle, to be in solidarity with each other and to struggle together. And I think the
Yeah.
challenges that the church faces are the same ones that everybody faces with respect to the lure of finances, the way things are easier, can and all the struggles that the industry faces are the same struggles the church faces.
Mhm.
We, however, have this framework, that we're supposed to use to interpret how we live, and if we do that, we hopefully will make the right choices. But it's tricky. It's always tricky. Uh,
Mhm.
Blair, again, thank you for sharing and for joining me today and
Thank
for
you.
being so vulnerable about our families. And I continue to be grateful not only for our friendship, but just the ways in which we're able to have these important and difficult conversations. And now just say that they're not, as you said, co-struggle. It is a struggle to talk about this.
Co-struggle.
It
Yeah.
is a struggle to
Some
be
things.
this open and vulnerable on the internet. But I know this podcast listened by to people like in Russia. There's like we have downloads in Russia, we have downloads in South Korea, we have downloads in actually I do think we have one in it's one of them Finland, didn't one of them up there. I can't remember which one. They're
Well,
all,
listen, and if you're listening and you're enjoying and you want to be part of the conversation, you can rate, review, share, subscribe. And you can follow what we're doing at the Loft in Westwood. Get on our socials and be part of the conversation, because this is a community together where we're
exactly.
building theology together.
Exactly. So since you have shouted us out, I don't really need to say that again. So thank y'all for joining us, and we will see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye.